Any whimper from a stray is typically drowned out by the early traffic and commotion, but this time the 14-year-old Lisa was devastated by the tragic quiet around a small, trembling dog. She didn't stop in her steps since she could actually hear him weep. Lisa had been cutting through a back alley in her neighborhood when she was shocked to discover that he could not hear her at all. Saw the puppy curled up beneath an overflowing trash can, its ribs visible through its thin tan coat. Trembled in terror, but seemed unfazed by the din of the street behind him. Intrigued, Lisa cautiously approached. She tried calling out louder yet, but got no answer to her comforting whispers. Nothing, but the puppy's eyes widened when she lightly caressed his side. She was shaking when she realized he was deaf. Word of a deaf puppy traveled swiftly. His neighbors rejected him as an unadoptable burden. Thus the poor thing would never fit in. Lisa felt a connection with the dog right away, even though no one wanted to hear her speak. However, he became noticeably calmer when she provided a soothing presence. It seemed as though he had experienced true kindness for the first time in. Lisa made the decision to take him home at that moment because of his brief and lonely existence. Despite her parents' misgivings, she gave him the straightforward name Chance, which encapsulated everything she wanted to give him. Concerned about the challenges of training and the dog's possible health problems, Lisa persisted and demanded at the very least, a trip to the veterinarian prior to making any final judgments during the examination. Chance's complete deafness was determined by a veterinarian to be most likely congenital. He was undernourished and barely surviving, even though the pup waggled his tail whenever Lisa gave him a gentle, consoling pat on the side. In the days that followed, Lisa made an effort to teach him simple hand signals, but he was afraid since it felt like he was walking in the dark. Her pals made fun of her for adopting a dismal attitude whenever someone she knew approached, as though anticipating rejection or worse. And even her own parents doubted that a busy family could manage the additional consideration needed. But Lisa noticed a gleam in Chance's eyes that assured her he was worth every effort. But she had no idea that the greatest difficulties and the most devastating turn was yet to come. Chance's soul, as well as her steadfast love for him since Lisa brought Chance into her family's small house. Her parents were both hopeful and apprehensive about the small puppy's presence. With exhausted looks, Margaret and Dennis stood by the doorway, uncertain of how to deal with a dog that couldn't hear them. Voices, but Lisa maintained that with patience and time, Chance would learn too. She spent the first evening with him in the living room, holding him in her lap and caressing his, desperate to show it. Even though she knew he couldn't hear a word, she still whispered quietly into his ears. Chance was left in a makeshift play pen constructed out of cardboard boxes and other materials when Lisa left for school the following day. Margaret, who worked part-time, agreed to check on baby gates in the kitchen, but Lisa came back hours later to discover a small-scale disaster scene. Chance had chewed through one of the more fragile cardboard pieces and was exploring the house. His wild wagging had knocked over a lamp and left tiny puddles of urine on the hallway floor when Lisa shouted out his name in terror, but instead of looking up, he quickly fled, surprised by her abrupt entry within his narrow area of vision. But Lisa remained composed since she knew Chance wasn't being rebellious. He was just unable to react to noises. She, bending down, encouraged him to approach her. While lightly tapping the floor, Chance's head turned as he felt the vibrations. When he recognized her, he felt a glimmer of comfort. Lisa lifted him up and pressed her cheek against his. It was Dennis sighed at the little triumph, which was still enough to make her grin. Her parents, however, weren't as readily soothed. Lisa swallowed her as she mumbled something about too much trouble and, how do you even train a deaf dog? Annoyance. But she secretly started to wonder if she had ever taken on more than she could manage. Every time she walked into the room, she saw Chance's tail wagging and felt an unwavering determination to continue. Made the late decision to investigate training techniques created especially for deaf dogs. She spent the night watching films, reading forums, and making notes in a battered spiral notebook she learned from an experienced trainer that deaf puppies may learn hand signals, but timing and consistency are key. The piece stressed the need of using soft touch lighting, or even. Lisa experienced a spike in excitement as a result of the vibrations, maybe indicating a route map. After all, she persuaded her parents to take her and Chance to a local dog training center the next weekend. Although they did not expressly serve deaf canines, Pauline, an elderly patient, was one of the staff members, volunteered to assist Lisa as she attempted to demonstrate sit with a hand motion, and Pauline gave Chance a short pat on the back and nodded, saying, "He's smart." Notice grinning at the puppy's inquisitive head tilt. "And you're determined. That's half the fight." Lisa began instructing Chance in A. She would crouch down and softly move her hand towards her chest as a simple come signal. An ensured Chance noticed it. When he came close, she gave him a special treat and a soft back rub. Chance gradually became aware of it and started observing Lisa intently. The sessions weren't flawless because he was still distracted by her hands and face, and occasionally whimpered in terror as people shifted behind him. But Lisa's parents were making progress. Cautiously hopeful, Margaret observed that Chance's eyes brightened whenever Lisa walked into a room, and even Dennis acknowledged. Dennis said, "He's got a sweet nature," while tossing a soft tennis ball one afternoon as the dog grew on him. Chance chased it awkwardly across the yard, going over its course, but it came running back with its tail wagging. Every time the dog attempted to nuzzle the man's leg, his tough veneer cracked a little, although things weren't always easy. Mrs. Worth, the family's neighbor, allegedly criticized Chance right away. Even though he was actually silent, he howled at night and bemoaned the possibility that his presence would draw other stray animals. Lisa heard her parents and the neighbor having a furious argument that evening, during which the neighbor insisted that the dog be always kept on a leash, even in their own front yard. Lisa tightened her. How could she explain that Chance was already feeling anxious because he was deaf? Tensions between moderate socialization and the demand for space simmered when Lisa returned home after a message pinned on their front door one afternoon at school. "Keep that mutt under control, or I'll call an animal." She was terrified of what would happen if the authorities took away Lisa's. Although her parents reassured her that they wouldn't allow it to occur, their worried voices made it clear to the family that providing assistance to a crippled dog involved more than just teaching them skills. It also required navigating an environment that wasn't always. In spite of these external stresses, Chance's health problems started to manifest. He occasionally had trouble keeping food down and coughed intermittently, especially after meals. At first, Lisa thought she pleaded that although the strain of training and moving could be wearing her down, her gut told her something else wasn't right. Reluctantly, her parents consented to another veterinary visit during the veterinarian furrowed her brow during the assessment, since his weight gain is slower than. Palpating the puppy's abdomen, she added, "We may require x-rays and blood testing to rule out any underlying issue." Lisa's stomach rumbled. Could Chance's? By the time they left the clinic, Lisa's mind was racing with anxiety since the difficulties went beyond her being deaf. Couldn't get rid of the veterinarian's kind but worried tone. She didn't want to encounter another medical obstacle, particularly after persuading her neighbors and parents to give this dog a shot. But she held on to the hope that early intervention could prevent him from suffering a worse destiny. But what if? Will her parents still allow her to have a dog with special needs? This was more serious than any of them had anticipated. Considering possible medical issues at home, she sat on the kitchen floor next to. Chance gave him a handful of kibble, which he gingerly sniffed before being prodded. Lisa rubbed the soft fur around his ears with her palm in an attempt to reassure him. With tears welling up in the corners of her eyes, she understood that for them both, the veterinary examinations tomorrow would be a significant turning point. Either they would have to fight another uphill battle or. Lisa barely slept the night before Chance's scheduled appointment after learning that Chance had been engaged in a covert conflict all along. Concerning veterinary examinations, she wondered what would happen if the scan showed a major illness. In addition to a growing medical emergency, parents determined they couldn't manage a dog with special requirements as the morning. Lisa discreetly got up and put on her trainers as the sun peeked through her bedroom curtains, and crept down to see how Chance was doing. He was snuggled up in his tiny dog bed, his chest rising and falling in a gentle. Despite his constant rhythm deafness, he nevertheless felt her presence and raised his head as soon as she came close. Despite her anxiety, she felt a glimmer of hope as she caressed his ears and nuzzled her hand. Chance always had. Big impact on her. Perhaps this is just another obstacle they can overcome together. A few hours later, the three of them, Chance, Lisa, and her father Dennis, entered the veterinarian's office. Tried to appear composed, but Lisa could tell he was nervous because the waiting area was calm except for the occasional bark from a dog in a carrier. Chance held on Lisa's thigh with shivering. But as bigger dogs passed by, he had become used to Lisa's cues, so he calmed a little when she stroked his collar tenderly and waved her fingers quickly downward, letting him know she was. When a veterinary assistant eventually led them into an examination room, after telling him to stay, Lisa's heart began to race as usual. The fast body inspection and standard weight check proceeded without a hitch, although the assistant scowled a little at He hasn't put on as much weight as we had hoped since his last appointment, according to the scale reading, she wrote courteously. Figures down. Dennis pursed his lips in worry before the x-rays arrived. Lisa supported Chance on the table, while murmuring calming words that he couldn't hear but hoped would be heard because of the soft. He would feel comforted by touches, but the machine's buzz was frighteningly loud even. Although she was certain that Chance's ears wouldn't be bothered, the entire procedure only took a few minutes. But by the time they returned to the examination room, Lisa clutched Chance in her arms because she was nervous. After a little wait, she felt his tiny heart pounding against her own. Dr. Ramirez, a veterinarian, came in with a folder of printed. Lisa felt her tummy turn over, and she glanced at her father, who stared. I was just as uncomfortable when Dr. Ramirez put the x-ray pictures on a bright screen. She pointed to fuzzy patches on Chance's chest and esophagus, explaining that she was worried about these black places. The pictures, they may show a congenital condition known as megaesophagus, or even an underlying cardiac condition, will require additional testing, including blood work and potentially an ultrasound, to determine exactly what's called megaesophagus that Lisa was experiencing. She had read about it in her late-night investigation into a disorder that can cause difficulty swallowing, resulting in malnourishment and a recurring danger of, if Chance had aspiration pneumonia, it would necessitate special nutrition. Techniques, such as utilizing a special chair or raising his meal bowl to aid with gravity. Dennis breathed gently, stroking his back as he guided the meal down his throat. Of his neck, attempting to maintain a steady tone, he inquired, "So what does that mean for his long-term health?" "Well, Dr. Ramirez started out carefully. Some canines, with the right care, have long lives, whereas others may experience recurrent infections, and it does necessitate a great deal of additional care. The good news is that you have potential, and you will learn more based on the results of the blood tests and ultrasound. Symptoms early, so we could take action." The journey home was a blur, and Lisa held Chance's collar, attempting to soothe him down in the back seat. But her thoughts were racing with the worst-case scenarios, making her question whether her parents. This additional layer of complexity would be too much for someone who is already worried about the difficulties of raising a deaf puppy. Handle the heavy silence from her father, the expense of frequent veterinary visits, and the need for specialized equipment. Lisa's anxiousness was only increased when they drew into the driveway. After entering, totally spent, she carefully put Chance in his kennel with. She touched her palm to her chest, a sign she had been employing for its purpose, while holding a soft cover so he could view her face. "All right," but was her father slouching with his elbows resting on the kitchen table? "Lisa, I just need a minute," he whispered, holding his face in his hands. "Go check on your." Lisa nodded, swallowing her anxieties, and went upstairs to find her mother, who was also frightened. "Do we have any results yet?" Margaret whispered to her mother in the living room, who was still wearing the same anxious look. "Not definitive," Lisa said, looking over her shoulder for a glimpse of Dennis. "They believe there may be a disease that calls for specific feeding methods and additional medication. We'll need an ultrasound for verification." Margaret's gaze strayed to the window with Chance's homemade dog run in sight. "Outside, honey, your father and I will need to talk about the logistics." Lisa's throat constricted as she realized the implied meaning we could not be able to retain him, and the idea of abandoning Chance, particularly after he had gone this far, felt like betrayal. But she also understood that her parents had a legitimate concern about the family spending plan. was already overburdened, and there was no assurance that this problem could be controlled that afternoon. Chance took a stroll around the neighborhood, using a soft harness to help her decompress. Lead him with taps and cues that fit his personality. Chance sniffed contentedly along the sidewalk, completely unaware that his future was in jeopardy. However, for Lisa, every tail wag was a harsh reminder of what she may lose: neighbors who mutter about the troublesome neighbor and the deaf dog as they pass by. As her family attempted to tend to him, she noticed Mrs. Worth still looking behind her curtains. When Chance stopped at a patch of grass, Lisa crouched beside him, disapprovingly ignoring the steps. "I'll fight for you," she said. She massaged his silky ears, hoping to protect him, even though she couldn't say it out loud in a way he could hear. From every derisive glance and challenge life had presented him with that evening after. Arranging a comfortable bed for Chance in Lisa's room after her parents summoned her downstairs and had a quiet discussion about budgets, timetables, and the emotional toll Lisa stood on her heart. Fearing that Chance would have to be rehomed, Margaret stretched over and put a soft touch on her daughter's shoulder and murmured, "We haven't made any final decisions, but we are unable to make decisions. We'll wait for the test results till we get the complete medical picture. But in the meanwhile, we'll try our best to assist you." Cared for him, but it wasn't a guarantee. Lisa's eyes pricked with tears of relief, and she nodded. Unable to talk, the message was obvious, and there was a brief reprieve whether he would assert that their family's permanent position would be determined by the results of the tests and how far along everyone was. Prepare to travel in order to save a puppy that the world had already declared to be broken in the past. After that, Lisa lived in a condition of hypervigilance all the time, anticipating the phone to ring with the outcome of Chance's gut constricted each time it buzzed during her subsequent tests, and she hurried to respond, only to discover it was merely a school friend or a telemarketer, and she made nervous notes in her journal regarding disorders of the megaesophagus, heart, special feeding methods, or anything that might be useful to Chance in the interim if the worst happened. Chance ran around the house with an uneasy joy that occasionally betrayed his innocent ignorance of the tension. Lisa started lightly tapping the floor in each new area, which caused furniture to skid and books to fall off shelves. Chance studied her before going in to make sure the dog, who is deaf, wouldn't be startled by her unexpected arrival. He had mastered the art of closely following her hands and eyes. For example, he would trot any time she looked at a patch of sunlight, over to look inside it, as though interpreting her body language for hidden clues. Lisa felt that if Chance was real, it was time to attempt some specialized feeding methods that she had found online. Didn't have a Bailey chair, but feeding him upright could help ease the strain on his esophagus. She made do by breaking open an old piece of cardboard, which is a particular device frequently used for dogs with megaesophagus. Chance was gently lifted and persuaded to sit after she constructed a makeshift back support out of a box in the kitchen corner. He wriggled at first when she held a shallow dish of soft puppy food beneath his nose as he was standing up straight against the cardboard. Lisa allowed him to suck some of the food from her, but he wriggled more in confusion than terror. She repeated the action with her fingertips, softly moving it to his mouth, allowing. Despite using an unusual technique, he swallowed and waited for any indication of coughing. Appeared to work because he was able to finish half of his food without choking or gagging. Lisa smiled, oblivious to the cramp in her arm from steadily holding the plate, until her mother, Margaret, entered. She paused at the location and said, "Is this safe?" with genuine worry. "Well, it could be helpful if he has the swallowing issue Lisa described in the article I read." Margaret nodded, her eyes displaying a trace of grudging adoration as she discussed how maintaining him upright allows gravity to perform the work. "Okay, let me bring a couple extra towels so that there isn't food all over their tiny kitchen." Dennis, Lisa's father, even raised his eyebrows at the spontaneous feeding station. Waking awoke to see his daughter bending over a piece of cardboard and directing wet food morsels to interested puppies. Although he remained silent, Lisa saw that he lingered for a moment, seemingly trying to comprehend this new routine. She ignored the typical barrage of puppy memes and cat videos as she browsed social media on her phone that evening. She discovered a club devoted to sharing success stories regarding deaf dogs with medical issues. to dogs with specific requirements where owners from all around the world exchanged advice from sign. Lisa was persuaded to participate by language commands to the designs for the homemade Bailey chair. And, within hours of receiving it, wrote a touching essay introducing herself and Chance. Encouraging remarks, "Keep going. My dog was given 6 months to live, and he's now. You're doing a fantastic job," for years old. Lisa posted this the following day. Her parents are keen to see firsthand evidence that special needs dogs may lead happy lives in an online community. Margaret appeared to be impacted by the stories, but Dennis just nodded and folded his arms. Nevertheless, it's nice that there are individuals in the world trying, he said, but before we get our expectations up too high, let's see what the veterinarian says. 2 more days went by with no call from. Chance's cough at the moment got a little worse, but it was still sporadic, with each hacking sound. When Lisa saw that her heart was racing more frequently after he played hard or ate fast, she changed her routine, putting aside more time to gradually feed him. Her family was irritated by this diligence, as they missed having a habit. But nobody voiced any complaints, not even her father, who periodically observed Lisa feeding Chance upright and, "Guess we won't be feeding him table scraps anytime soon," was a sardonic comment that, in its own way, indicated approval. And just when Lisa thought she would go crazy waiting for the phone to ring, the call finally arrived. She almost dropped the phone in her haste to calmly answer Dr. Ramirez's voice in the middle of a Saturday morning. But Lisa reported her parents for putting the call on speaker when the measurement leaked through the receiver. "I have chances. According to the vet's blood testing and ultrasound findings, we did find a slight esophageal growth at this. Although his megaesophagus is not yet fully developed, he is undoubtedly at risk for more serious problems as he gets older, and his heart has some abnormalities but not a significant flaw, but sufficient to merit investigation. Future issues could arise, but they're not." Lisa gave a trembling, half-relieved, half-life-threatening breath. "So what's the plan?" Dr. Dread Dennis persisted. "Well, we can manage this, Dr. Elevated feeding like you've been doing small, frequent meals," Ramirez added. "Having frequent examinations to track his development. There's a good chance if we continue to monitor this," she said, pausing to smile. "Can lead a relatively normal life. We'll also want," she said in an unintentional pun, "to reevaluate his heart in a few months and, if necessary, put him on light medication." They hung up, torn between 2 feelings. The somber knowledge that a lifelong routine was ahead and the comfort that Chance didn't necessitate emergency surgery. Lisa turned to her parents, whose hands were shaking, "So that we might keep him as we adhere to the veterinarian's directions." Margaret and Dennis looked at each other for a while before Lisa's neck went. After a while, her mother nodded gently, saying, "He's a member of our family. Let's do what it takes." Takes Lisa, who is deaf, into her arms while kneeling and blinking back tears. Despite the fact that he was the puppy, she felt her chest as he turned towards the vibration of her cries and nuzzled her cheek, feeling thankful and a sense of accomplishment that her restless evenings and hectic research weren't in vain. Lisa created a feeding schedule and pinned it to the refrigerator that afternoon in an attempt to adjust to the new normal. Daily meals, all of which were meticulously weighed. She began looking online for used Bailey chair in the hopes of giving. Her father measured the kitchen's corners while murmuring about giving her arms a rest and a shot at stability. Her mother even drew a design on scratch paper while wearing the same considerate attire to determine how to best fit a device there. Grimace she made after moving furniture out of the living room window when Lisa noticed Mrs. Worth, their neighbor. She felt a surge of nervousness twist in her stomach as she peered through lace curtains. Lisa squared with a woman who kept complaining or reporting them to animal control. Shoulders. She was prepared to prove to anybody who had any doubts that Chance wasn't a hopeless case or just another stray. Real evidence that kindness and caring may triumph over insurmountable obstacles together. Tiny wiggle of Chance's story, with every dependable look he gave Lisa, felt more purposeful. Their path wasn't simple, but for the first time since she'd met him, hope triumphed over fear as she trembled in that alley. And as she rubbed his head, her thoughts reverberated with a pledge that in a few days, We will face whatever happens next together. Following the completion of Chance's feeding schedule, Lisa's household descended into a morning started with a soft wake-up for Lisa and her new, delicate routine. When it was time to get up, the puppy had learned to anticipate her gentle strokes on his shoulder, and then came the cautious. Lisa kept him in position during his upright feeding ritual while her mother presented a tiny bowl of prescription puppy chow or mash kibble as advised by Dr. Ramirez each. The procedure lasted around 15 minutes, but the methodical slow pace prevented the possibility of choking or gagging as the progress was loaded with. Outside the home, Lisa exuded cautious optimism, but anxiety persisted. One afternoon, Lisa almost ran into her as she stealthily left the front door with Chance in her arms. The elderly neighbor, Mrs. Worth, frowned and gripped a small bundle of mail. Peering down at the puppy, she questioned, "Is that dog still coughing all night?" Lisa stiffened. "He's actually getting better, and he doesn't growl or bark, so he shouldn't annoy you." She made an effort to speak quietly so as not to aggravate. The woman sniffed while glancing at the harness Lisa was holding in her other hand. "I only hope you manage him, because your racket Lisa's cheeks have already woken my husband and me up once." She bit her tongue, even though Burn Chance wasn't the one making noise because he was deaf. Instead of arguing, she put the dog on the grass, and he sniffed it avidly while she tried to look casual. Chance leaped forward and almost tangled Lisa in the leash after Lisa made a tiny follow signal with her hand. Under Mrs. Worth's disapproving gaze, Lisa reddened once more. Returning inside, she discovered her father was bent over the coffee table in the living room, going through a pile of veterinarian bills and notes. He looked up as Chance trotted after Lisa as she entered, and a look of pity appeared on his face. Everything was okay outside. Lisa exhaled as the neighbor continued to complain, so she knelt down to take Chance's harness off and comfort him. Scratched behind the ears. "I hope people would understand that he isn't capable of making the noise that they are accusing him of, Dennis." Coldly agreed. "It's unfair, but try to let it go. We have more important things to handle, such as paying these bills." He tapped a sheet of paper that listed the price of Chance's next recheck ultrasound. "I spoke with your mother, and we decided to figure something out, but it means..." Lisa's gut nodded with remorse, since there would be no family trip this year. "I'm sorry, Dad. Please don't apologize. You love him, and we're not sorry. I know this is a lot." He stretched over and squeezed her shoulder. Given her dad's calm resolve, quitting up might only be a short few months. Lisa started looking for methods to help with the growing veterinarian expenses, so she created a straightforward flyer called Help Chance Thrive, and with her mother's consent, she posted the flyers with a photo of the puppy, describing his particular needs. On town-wide community boards of the neighborhood library, supermarket, and even her. She did not explicitly plead for money at the school's main desk, but she did indicate that any given dog supplies or used, an adjustable feeding chair or other medical equipment would be very beneficial to them. To her amazement, a few days later, she got a call from Glenn, a man who ran a carpentry shop and claimed to have seen the flyer. He offered to assist in creating a personalized feeding chair employing. Lisa excitedly showed him the blueprints she had discovered online using scrapwood. Promised to have a prototype soon. Lisa practically, and nodded attentively. Heart thumping with appreciation for a stranger's generosity that week, Lisa attempted to maintain Chance's daily. Stayed consistent, supporting his tiny body with her arms each time she fed him upright. She also initiated brief training sessions while he was eating, which reinforced basic hand signals he'd. He was easily attracted by the puppy's attention, but he had already how to sit still. His gaze followed Lisa's every move with unwavering passion. She smiled proudly when she was successful, and occasionally her parents would observe from the sidelines while drinking coffee and approvingly nodding when Chance agreed. But life may be unpredictable. One evening on a particularly easy training day, Lisa observed Chance appearing drowsy. He was hesitant to stand, and at first, her breathing was more labored than usual, and she attributed it to fatigue. Perhaps they had overworked him, but when she woke up that night to a faint moaning noise, she quickly turned on the Chance's bedside lamp has heaving sides and an unbearably hot snout. Didn't bark because he couldn't, but he shivered and panted in a way that made her heart race. Lisa woke her up. Together, Mom and Dad wrapped Chance in a blanket and hurried him to the fluorescent emergency veterinary facility across town. After what seemed like an age, Lisa held the puppy in her arms while the waiting room's lights created harsh shadows. Dr. Gupta, a composed individual with gentle eyes, listened as the veterinarian called them back. Before conducting a brief examination, he took Chance's temperature and scowled. "He's running a fever, may indicate an infection or even pneumonia related to an esophageal problem." Dr. Gupta gently squeezed Lisa's hand, saying, "There's always a risk of aspirating food into his lungs. We'll do a chest x-ray to verify Lisa's mental illness. She had read about it if Chance was. He might develop fluid in his lungs from aspirating even tiny amounts of food or water. And if it gets worse, she believed she bit her lip to keep from crying since she might not make it." Margaret had driven them to a sterile side room, where they sat with deep-seated apprehension while they awaited the findings. Creases on her face, Dr. Gupta eventually reappeared with a pair of digital scans. "It appears that he has minor pneumonia and some cloudiness in his lungs. Reported quietly. We were able to detect it early, so medications and close observation." Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. "Should help. We'll need to keep him here for a day or two on 4 fluids, just to be safe." Her chest constricted at the thought of abandoning Chance in a kennel without her hand signals or a consoling presence. Yet she gently bent down, knowing that it was best for him to receive professional attention, and put her forehead to the puppy's. He was unable to hear her reassuring whispers, but perhaps he could sense whether it's the warmth of her breath or the shaking of her body. "You're going to get through this," she said, her eyes gleaming. With somber eyes, the nurse ushered them away, explaining that they would allow Lisa to visit for a short time the next day as they drove home. In stillness, Lisa's thoughts swirled with questions. Did she push him to? Her mom grabbed her hand and said, "He'll be fine, sweetie. You did the right thing." Hard. Should she have been more careful during feeding? Lisa managed a hesitant nod, but as they arrived into their driveway, she noticed a figure. Right thing bringing him in. Once more, a silent observer moved behind Mrs. Worth's curtain, her figure firm in. At that moment, Lisa felt as though the entire world was against Chance's existence due to health issues and veterinarian issues. Cost local animosity. How much more could a deaf puppy put up with? Lisa tightened her fists in silent resolve that she wouldn't let him down as she ascended the stairs to her bedroom. Couldn't let him down. She would find a way to cover his medical expenses, keep him secure, and establish without a reasonable doubt that she refused to allow sadness because she believed that every life deserves a second shot, even if it meant waging war on several fronts. Lisa paced the length of the living room, becoming the last word in Chance's story. She had been at the emergency room, and as she stared at the silent phone on the coffee table, her stomach was turning to knots. 4 fluids and antibiotics for pneumonia exhaustion are given to the clinic overnight. Drew huge rings beneath her eyes, tormented by the recollection of the sleepless night she had. His panicked breathing and the worry that she hadn't done enough caused her parents to hover, looking at each other anxiously. As Margaret drank cold coffee and Dennis kept checking his watch, they all decided to let the minutes passed with Lisa staying at home from school till they received word from Dr. Gupta regarding Chance's condition. Finally, close to noon, the phone rang, and Lisa quickly grabbed it because of the excruciating delay. Dr. Gupta's tone was composed yet professional, and she almost dropped it when she said hello to Lisa. Chance's fever broke early this morning after a restful night, and the chest x-ray indicates a little less fluid in his. Lisa's knees felt like they were about to give out from the sudden release of her lungs. That's good, right? Yes, Dr. He's still in the woods, Gupta said, but we'll hold him another night for monitoring to assure the antibiotics are working perfectly. After hanging up, Lisa informed her parents, who each gave a. Dennis repeated, pressing a hand, the breath they seemed to have been holding for hours stable. "We can handle that." Margaret mustered a tiny smile and said, "At least," to his forehead. "He's getting better. If anything changes, I'm sure Dr. Gupta will call." With that sliver of optimism, Lisa attempted to concentrate on the bright side. She texted her teachers to catch up on schoolwork, but her mind strayed. She kept returning to the clean hallways of the facility and seeing Chance in a kennel, alone in death, surrounded by. Would he feel abandoned by strangers whose voices he couldn't hear? Did he wonder where she was? The whole family was startled when the doorbell rang that afternoon, and Lisa tensed, expecting to see a neighbor who had yet another grievance. But instead she discovered a delivery man carrying a big, flat item. Bewildered, she placed the return label on the kitchen table and signed for it. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Glenn's woodshop, the carpenter sheet. She must have finished the bespoke feeding chair because she excitedly tore apart the cardboard after meeting Chance and posting posters, displaying a finely constructed wooden frame with a little tray at the chest, movable panels, and a harness strap. Height. It was much more polished and sturdy than Lisa had hoped. Among the packing supplies was a handwritten letter that said, "Lisa, I hope this chair helps Chance feel a bit more at ease. Comfort during mealtimes, Glenn. Keep up the good work." Lisa's eyes misted up. She brushed her fingers across the polished wood, imagining the day Chance could give it a try, possibly following his recuperation from. Meanwhile, she was still appreciating the workmanship when her phone rang and a text message appeared from an unidentified number. "Hello, Pauline from the dog training center spotted your brochure and asked if I could. It appears like the universe is helping you if you need assistance setting up the feeding chair or practicing sign commands." Her mother wiped a tear from her own eye and whispered, "At last, you're giving us some leeway. Keep this prepared for Chance's return home." Dennis even nodded in admiration at the design's robust structure. "One nice carpenter," he muttered quietly as he went into the garage, perhaps to get some equipment and check whether any changes had to be made. But good news frequently sparks criticism, and this criticism came in the form of a letter. Lisa saw it taped to their front door the next morning as she was getting ready to head to the clinic in the hopes that, "To the owners of the dog, named Chance for a quick visit, we've gotten numerous complaints of possible negligence and disturbances. Therefore, we'll be doing a." Lisa's stomach churned during the follow-up examination to evaluate your animal's welfare. She hurried inside, eagerly brandishing the letter. "Look at this Margaret's face. It's so colorless," she said. "Dennis must be friendly because he rubbed his temples and complained about neglect, which is ridiculous." Lisa's tears welled up as she complained about her neighbor since day one, that how can they accuse us of negligence when Chance is actually receiving medical attention in the hospital? Margaret pushed a, "Calm down, we'll correct the record. Animal Services will verify that we're taking good care of him. We have a veterinarian. Documents, receipts, and everything else they decided to deal with." But Lisa's chest became a tight knot of worry. Felt it was unjust that Chance's position in their family may be jeopardized by a single negative impression or miscommunication. Shortly after Lisa left for the clinic, they had to defend themselves against untrue allegations after everything they had done. In the reception area, she was greeted by Dr. Gupta, who informed her that although Chance was still recovering, he was stable enough. She followed him down the antiseptic-scented hallways for a quick visit, her heart racing as they got closer to Chance's. Kennel's sob got stuck in her throat as she finally saw the puppy. He looked, despite having an IV catheter taped to his forehead and seeming little and fragile under the fluorescent lights, the instant he felt her. Lisa slowly slid onto a kennel floor as his tail bounced feebly, possibly because to vibrations or her fragrance. Dr. Gupta raised the kennel door enough for her to lean in on the stool next to him and stroke Chance's ears the way he felt comforting. He pressed his head against her hand and gazed into her large eyes, which showed a mix of relief and tiredness, even if. She waved her hand in the sign for good boy again, but he couldn't hear her voice. Chance kissed her fingers in a tiny circle at her chest, perhaps saying, "Thank you. You for coming. Is he going to be okay?" Lisa asked Dr. Gupta in a low voice. Thought about the question. His lungs are clearing, and the medications appear to be working. If all goes according to plan, we can release him tomorrow or the day after, but I need you to keep a tight eye on him at home in case he has any respiratory difficulties. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to get him back." As the visit came to a conclusion, she tenderly pressed her forehead against the opportunity for. On her way out, she wanted him to feel the warmth of her dedication one last time. She kept picturing a life without neighbor arguments or pneumonia scares, where she could just take pleasure in teaching her deaf puppy new signs and providing him with an upright diet. The handmade chair was now waiting at home, but with the neighbor's concerns, the real world rarely offers such peace. Looming and the endless medical expenses mounting, Lisa felt that there were yet more obstacles to overcome. She promised herself one thing while continuing to look into Chance's dependable eyes. She would support him no matter what, even if it meant avoiding regulatory scrutiny or going broke on vet bills. But she wouldn't leave the dog, who couldn't hear her, but had learned more about her heart than anybody else could. Lisa didn't get much sleep that night, her thoughts racing at. She was awake before dawn, searching for the twin concerns of Chance's health and the impending animal services inspection. The house for anything that would appear careless, such as half-chewed toys, old newspapers on the floor, or even a slight odor. When her parents awoke, she was cleaning the living room's nooks and crannies because there was dog food still in the kitchen. Her mother responded, "Sweetheart, you'll exhaust yourself," while holding a pail of soapy water. Rubbing Lisa's back gently, "We can't give them anything because we have all morning to prepare. Is there any reason to question our affection for Chance?" Lisa mumbled, aiming at a persistent scratch mark on the baseboard. Margaret exchanged a troubled look with Dennis, who nodded grimly in agreement, indicating that they already believe we are the evil guys. The tension in the air made Lisa think of the evening they had taken Chance home for the first time, when fear and optimism were mixed together in him. Later that morning, a gray vehicle arrived outside the house, accompanied by an unsettling cocktail. When a woman with a clipboard appeared with a clean polo shirt embroidered with the animal, Lisa's stomach knotted. Using the service's logo, she identified herself as a quiet officer named Jane Alvarez. Lisa, a perceptive person who never missed anything, forced a kind grin against the impulse to come across as defensive. Recognized that there have been some grievances about a special needs puppy that Officer Alvarez started once. Everyone was gathered in the living room. "Dennis, I'm here to evaluate the dog's living circumstances and general well-being." Cleared his throat. "Yeah, Chance is currently recuperating from pneumonia at the veterinary clinic." He held up. Alvarez nodded while carefully going through a stack of signed documents and veterinary bills as proof. "It's nice to know you're. I'm grateful to have something tangible. In addition to providing him with competent care, could you show me where he typically eats and sleeps?" As Lisa escorted the officer through the house, she proudly displayed the personalized feeding chair and described how a kind Glenn, a carpenter, had constructed it so that Chance could eat up straight. She also showed her the entire container in Lisa's bedroom. Alvarez asked a number of insightful inquiries while lying in a comfy bed and holding a bowl of water. Despite her calm demeanor, Lisa's training regimen and how they dealt with the dog's deafness, nerves still tense, she remembered how one misunderstanding may bring an animal to ruin in the eyes of the authorities. Yet as the examination went on, Alvarez's stance appeared to relax, and she noticed that the yard was safely walled. Although risk-free, she looked at the dog toys strewn about, which were evidence of hours of tried play and training. Nothing appeared to indicate that the abuse or neglect had returned to the. Considering what I've observed and the proof of continued veterinarian care, Living Room Alvarez took a moment to check over her notes. "Care, it looks like you're making the right arrangements for a dog with specific needs." She stopped and looked at Lisa. "Are there any instances of violence or unhygienic circumstances that we should be aware of?" About Lisa's trembling voice. "He's pleasant with everyone who shows him kindness, but he's just a little off. Some residents of the neighborhood misinterpreted it." So Alvarez nodded and said, "I'll submit a report stating that you're taking care of the dog's welfare needs. But please remember that we'll be here if there are any additional complaints." Her eyes darted to the window where Mrs. Worth's house silhouetted. Occasionally, neighbors mistook it. Lisa felt so relieved by the circumstances that her legs trembled. "Thank you," she muttered as officer. Alvarez left Lisa slumped on the couch, her eyes pricking with relief. "Well," Dennis remarked with a trembling laugh as both parents let out long, tired breaths. Margaret said softly, "Now we just need Chance home. Avoiding him. That's one crisis averted." That request earlier than anticipated, Dr. Gupta contacted later the afternoon to say. He warned that although Chance had responded well to the medications, he's still weak. but you may take him home as long as you adhere to a rigorous rest and food schedule." Lisa practically soared into the clinic foyer as the nurse guided her. The ride home felt unreal as Lisa held Chance in her arms while warning them to return for a follow-up in a week. Watching his breathing intently from the rear seat for any indication of a relapse, Dennis drove more slowly than normal, as though he too acknowledged the vulnerability of their priceless cargo, and upon arriving at the residence, Margaret welcomed them with. For the next 3 days, Lisa and her parents hovered like hawks in the living room, where they made a comfortable nest of blankets. Chance was lying curled up on a blanket in a tiny recovery area, his ears perked up. Tears burned Lisa's eyes as she gently lifted him as soon as she came close and he attempted to rise, stumbling a little. Chance, who is deaf, pressed her cheek into his fur and leaned into the sensation of. In her remarks, Dr. Gupta provided last-minute guidance regarding prescription regimens. The ride home felt unreal as Lisa held Chance in her arms while warning them to return for a follow-up in a week. Watching his breathing intently from the rear seat for any indication of a relapse, Dennis drove more slowly than normal, as though he too acknowledged the vulnerability of their priceless cargo, and upon arriving at the residence, Margaret welcomed them with. For the next 3 days, Lisa and her parents hovered like hawks in the living room, where they made a comfortable nest of blankets. Putting Chance in a new feeding chair and giving antibiotics on a strict schedule for each meal, he tolerated Glenn's creation surprisingly well, allowing Lisa to place a dish of moist food beneath his chin, making sure the lumps didn't collect in his neck. Chance appeared to like the routine, although Lisa calmed him with soft strokes, signing "good boy," as he occasionally poured at the wooden sides in bewilderment. As Lisa gently took Chance back to his blankets from the feeding chair on a rainy evening, the doorbell. When her father answered the phone, Glenn himself showed a soft smile on his worn. "Pauline at the training center told me that you had brought the puppy home, so he came to see how the feeding chair was doing." As he described entering, Lisa smiled and showed him how Chance was eating, and Glenn smiled proudly. "I hoped that a craftsman would run his touch over the smooth wood." Sensing a new presence, he lingered with his eyes on the puppy and waddled. As if to express gratitude, he twitched his nose and pressed his muzzle against Glenn's knee. A tiny island of goodwill among the whirlpool of difficulties Lisa's family encountered, full of camaraderie. Glenn shook Dennis's hand and silently thanked him for his kindness. But outside, the neighborhood Lisa was being battered by rain and wind that rattled the windows. She was reminded of how quickly tranquility might be broken when Glenn went, and she gave her back the shutter. When she turned her attention to Chance and noticed that his respiration was a little faster than usual, a panic attack erupted in her chest. She crouched beside his covers, grabbed a thermometer, wondering if he was growing a fever again or if she was simply nervous from the chaos. When Lisa removed it, her parents watched with equal anxiety from behind. They all knew how to keep the tension in the air, even though the reading was slightly higher but not dangerously so. One mistake in feeding procedure and delicate Chance's health remained, and they might end up back in the emergency room later that evening. Lisa watched from the window. In the faint reflection, she could make out the outline of rivulets of rain streaking the glass. Chance was sleeping soundly at her feet, and his deafness struck her once more as a blessing and a curse because he was unable to hear the storm raging and was also unable to find comfort in. Instead, he depended on her presence and her delicate touch, as well as the faint hum of her voice. And Lisa decided in that little flash of lightning outside that regardless of how many storms pounded their world, she would be as resilient as the personalized feeding chair that provided him with. Everyday mornings now began with Lisa closely examining Chance's. Until she heard his steady exhalations, her heart was racing. The pup still had a slight rasp, but at least he wasn't having the same breathing difficulties as he had during the pneumonia crisis, and she and her parents closely adhered to Dr. Gupta's directions for several little meals that are all fed upright in the chair, along with medication. It was a regimented practice, spaced precisely as directed, yet Lisa discovered, if she followed the guidelines exactly, she might feel more at ease in the structure and continue to get better outside of it. Lisa returned to school with difficulty as life marched on in her fragile bubble of care. manage the responsibilities of caring for a special needs dog while balancing her academics and schoolwork. Her pals teased her throughout lunch. Some were curious about how your dog is doing and whether you actually feed him a chair. And encouraging others made casual comments about how terrible it was that he couldn't hear Lisa's forced courteous nods. Resisting the impulse to tell them that Chance's deafness did not diminish him as a dog, the true difficulty was, no matter how often she rushed home from school in the hours before and after, she was constantly concerned about what may. If her parents had been able to properly feed Chance at lunch without Lisa's help, he would have breathed normally throughout the day. Practiced hand signals by scanning the living room every day as soon as she walked through the front door. Every time she saw Chance waving his tail or sleeping with his muzzle on the plush covers, she felt a wave of relief. When Lisa got home on Thursday, her father was in the kitchen, clutching the phone tightly and saying, "Yeah, thank you for informing us," he added quietly. "I understand." The instant he hung, Lisa's pulse quickened. "Is there a problem with Chance?" Dennis trembled. When he exhaled, the animal services officer continued. "Once more, the neighbor filed another. This time, you're complaining that your dog's persistent coughing is bothering you." But Officer Alvarez stated that she had previously documented that Lisa's slumping into a chair relief, and "We're doing everything we can to calm her wrath, but I don't understand why she despises him so much." Her father rubbed his. "People in temples are afraid of things they don't understand. Perhaps she's simply a chronic winner, but we're not." Allowing her nonsense to sabotage our progress was happening, but Chance gradually put on a little weight, and although his cough persisted, it was less. The dog center's trainer, Severe Pauline, started stopping by on the weekends to teach Lisa how to improve her hand signals. They practiced for brief periods of time, so Chance, despite his difficulties, the puppy had an incredible desire to please, tail wagging every. On a breezy Saturday, he accurately answered a new cue as Lisa and, in the backyard, Pauline was practicing orders when they heard a sudden shout from the neighbor, which shocked Lisa and caused her to turn around. Observe the neighbor's husband, Mr. Worth, looking glumly over the fence. "Keep that mud away from he said, "roses," making sure Chance had inserted his nose through a hole in the, smelling the flowery aroma coming from the Pauline. Fence boards held up a courteous palm, saying, "He's not causing any damage." Mr. Hayworth scoffed, "Sir, we're just training in a secure, enclosed area. Don't you dare bring germs onto my property." Lisa bit back her retorted after witnessing him hacking up a lung yesterday. She was able to calmly reply. Pauline stepped forward. "Sir, and I comprehend your worries, but this dog is supervised by a veterinarian and is not infectious. He is simply coping with a chronic." Before stomping, condition HYMPH, Mr. Worth gave Chance one final look of disdain. Lisa's shoulders slumped as she gave Pauline a pitying look inside his home. "I apologize. They have been this way from the beginning." Pauline gave Lisa a pat on the arm. "Don't let that deter you. You can hear their nasty remarks, and perhaps they will eventually realize he poses no threat." Small triumphs persisted as a result of these tensions, and Chance taught him to wait patiently for a signal at the back door. He deduced that a solid hand facing him signified stay before he started to trot outdoors. It lessened the frequency with which he almost ran into furniture. As a result, Lisa felt increasingly proud. Observing him consistently surpass expectations, followed by an unforeseen cost that, as she was looking over the most recent veterinary bill, Margaret realized their monthly. The family budget was in ruins due to an increase in insurance premiums. "We can't keep up at this pace, Lisa," she acknowledged. Shaky voice in the evening, the examinations, the specialty diet, the medications we're. Fear gripped Lisa's heart as she clung to Chance, who was barely making ends meet. "But we're so close to stabilizing him," she begged, nestled on her lap. "Is there another way?" Dennis groaned, shaking his head. "We may all need to get a side gig or part-time work, or just me. We can't risk losing everything else, but we don't want to give up on him, honey." That weekend, Lisa searched local community boards and internet advertising for any small tasks she might be able to find, such dog walking, lawn mowing, or babysitting. She even inquired about financial assistance programs from a special needs dog group she joined. To her astonishment, a number of participants provided links to charitable organizations that provided grants or venues for fundraising for animals with. Lisa spent hours writing a meaningful piece about medical conditions that inspired her. She shared Chance's tale on a crowdfunding website, along with images of him in his feeding chair, in the hopes that strangers would may provide a small amount to his continued care. In less than 2 days, the campaign raised almost half of the people moved by the tale of a deaf puppy fighting health issues began sending in first goal notes. Submitted private messages expressing how they had previously taken care of a sick pet or how Lisa's commitment was admirable. She read them with tears in her eyes and saw each donation as a sign that perhaps, although they weren't alone, the Worth's online support was unable to protect them from the conflict that arose in real life. Their grievances by sending a follow-up letter to Animal Services asserting that Chance's condition constituted a public. This time, however, the complaint brought little traction. Officer Alvarez any recognition had witnessed enough to know it wasn't true, but Lisa's family was subjected to the stress of living under continual observation. Lisa's stomach dropped as they received a tap on the door, anticipating more formal letters or requests. After a busy day, Lisa and Chance relaxed in the living room in the evening, petting his gentle ears and looking at the. Glenn had offered to make some adjustments to the partially completed Bailey chair across the room in order to further stabilize it. Chance sniffed her hand, seeing her agitated motions, and cocked his head to inquire as to what was bothering Lisa. "If only you could understand how hard we're fighting," she said, feeling tears well up in her eyes, aware that he couldn't hear a word, but Chance's licking of her palm gave the impression that he understood, which made all the difference. Over the course of the weeks, Lisa's family found a delicate equilibrium, balancing Chance's unique, regular school responsibilities with the seething conflicts with their neighbors, but every victory felt like a huge opportunity. Earning an additional £1, an internet donor sending a useful amount, or Pauline lauding Chance's development during a training session, but Lisa was never able to get rid of the feeling that she was. One pristine Saturday morning, she was on a tightrope, one strong breeze away from losing everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The family made the risky decision to take him for a small walk in the neighborhood park so he could smell the grass. They put him in a soft harness so they could feel the autumn wind on his fur. Fully equipped with reflective patches to make him highly visible to onlookers, Lisa put a little banner on. "Deaf dog approach, slowly hoping to ward off any sudden noise," was written on his harness. The air felt lighter beyond the top perimeter of their houses, but there were no loud noises or motions that might surprise him. Dennis carried a collapsible water bowl while Lisa stayed alert, regularly checking Chance's respiration, and they were better prepared than most dog owners would ever need to be, and Margaret was clutching a little bag of the special wet food. To avoid startling Chance with her speed, Lisa seized the initiative and delicately tapped the ground before moving forward. To her relief, the morning proceeded without incident at first, and she trotted behind his characteristic shaky eagerness, periodically turning to look at Lisa to make sure she was still present among the other park guests. Lisa smiled sheepishly as she was captivated by the harness sign and made pleasant waves or inquired politely about his deafness, describing how their sincere interest in hand signals differed greatly from the animosity she had become accustomed to. Dennis. They finally located a grassy area where they could relax, spread a tiny blanket, and positioned Chance up to her as Margaret opened the container of wet food, legs feeding him in measured spoonfuls to prevent choking. Even though it was awkward, had become second nature. Nature keeps him at the proper angle, pausing between bites to look for coughing, which triggers a high-pitched yelp. A German huge, off-leash dog pierced the air, but Lisa felt it reverberate in her chest. Chance couldn't hear it. The owner of the shepherd mix, a preoccupied teenager with earbuds in, was yards behind them when the dog ran towards them. Calling out haltingly, the shepherd slid before Lisa could fully react, came to a stop directly in front of Chance, who was sniffing at him with great interest. Chance noticed the movement too late, quickly tightened up after twisting his head to observe what was going on and missing the shepherd's growl or warning. Chance shrank back, his eyes wide as he read only the other dog's rigid posture. Lisa's pulse raced since Chance wouldn't hear any growls of warning or have time to flee if the shepherd became hostile. When Margaret attempted to call the faraway teenager, Dennis moved forward with his arms out in a conciliatory gesture. But everything happened too fast, and the shepherd, cornered and bewildered, bared its teeth and gave in. Lisa lunged as he squeaked suddenly and attempted to retreat, tangled in his harness. She positioned herself between the two dogs and yelled, "Hey," while flailing her arm. The larger dog was diverted by the maneuver to attract the shepherd's attention, allowing its owner to eventually come and seize its collar, dragging the German shepherd away while mumbling an apology. The German shepherd was still. Lisa's loud barking alerted onlookers, who stared at her, some in worry, others with inquisitive. Her parents soothed Chance while examining him for wounds. Unharmed, but visibly rattled by the experience at home, Lisa set the stage, stroking his ears softly on the rug in the living room as he calmed down after the park incident that shook them all to their core. Reminder that there were many unforeseen risks in the world, some of which Chance would not have noticed until it was. Even a simple bark could be a silent menace that caught him off guard, but it was too late. During supper, the family talked about ways to keep him safe, and Margaret offered a. Dennis suggested that they stay away from crowded parks or times when there may be more canines around because of the colorful vest that reads, "Deaf dog," in larger font. Off-leash, she couldn't overlook the actual dangers, but she also didn't want to restrict Chance's experiences. Perhaps there's a way to teach him to keep an eye on us if another dog comes in that direction. Talk to Pauline, Lisa replied. For a few minutes, there was hope in the air as her parents agreed, saying, "We can tell him to remain calm." Barrier that they could conquer together. But late that evening, Lisa's phone rang with a text message from a school acquaintance. "Did you read the next door post regarding your dog?" Lisa was so upset that she went to the local forum and discovered a post titled "Aggressive Deaf Dog in the Park," which detailed a risky situation when a big, tawny puppy refused to obey orders. Had almost attacked another dog. Other neighbors added, sharing stories of half-truths or rumors that fueled the perception of Chance as. One commentator recommended that owners of impaired animals refrain from taking them outside due to the unpredictable danger. Lisa's chest ached from public outrage, so she typed a rageful response, then stopped too. Considering the criticism, she chose to close the app, her eyes welling with rage. Did people truly believe Chance was the aggressor in her eyes? She had been there, watching him tremble in bewilderment, but suddenly, an internet rumor could cause serious harm by generating further complaints or escalating the already antagonistic neighbor's campaign. Spent a sleepless night formulating possible answers in her mind. Perhaps she could post images to reveal the truth, or video demonstrating Chance's kind interactions with others. But what if it instead attracted more negative attention? Remarks on his condition or her family's capacity to care for him. So she made the decision to discuss it with. Social media can be a veritable powder keg of gossip, as her parents' Dennis shook his head in dismay at the next door post. In its spirals, Margaret grimly scowled as she read the thread. I would politely and gently explain the facts to her, advise them to take a deep breath, and explain that Chance isn't hostile, and that we have a trainer and veterinarian who records everything. Lisa took out her laptop and wrote a thoughtful response, explaining that her dog was currently recovering from pneumonia and was deaf. He refrained from blaming the off-leash shepherd for startling her. Rather, she encouraged everyone who was unsure to meet Chance herself. Pauline even added a positive remark confirming that he performed well during training sessions, despite a few. Lisa was complimented by the neighbors for elucidating the persistent negativity, which some insisted. Some believed that animals with unique requirements should be kept at home, while others wondered if a deaf dog could ever be completely secure around. The discussion about kids or other pets undermined Lisa's self-confidence after she had worked. It was difficult to demonstrate Chance's abilities, but the public's perception felt. Later, Pauline came by to see how Chance was doing with his training that afternoon. She discovered Lisa ruminating on her phone, her face displaying pain and rage. Words might hurt, but they don't define you or Chance. He's gone a long way. Pauline placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Way to concentrate on that. Lisa looked at Chance, who was happily dozing off on his covers. Yes, the negative commentary was loud, but it didn't negate the progress they'd achieved. A sense of resolution swept through her. Anything that made her heart race. She would continue to teach Chance how to feed and prove the doubters wrong. Him standing, keeping an eye on his health, and perhaps one day the world might witness him as she did. A kind, tough dog deserving of. For a week, the online discussion about Chance raged on every new attempt. Lisa did her best to ignore the discussion on a local forum that was adding fuel to an already raging inferno. But she heard a nasty comment or false charge from students, worried neighbors, or well-meaning. Despite some people standing up for Chance, pals providing screenshots made a big impression. It appeared in Lisa's heart that no matter how much she clarified or how many pictures she posted of Chance contentedly, some people said that a visiting child was a threat or a bother since he was nuzzling him. As Lisa's parents balanced their professions, the house itself felt like a pressure cooker, with growing costs and frequent bills for more frequent veterinary examinations now seemed to be a constant reminder of how expensive specialized canine care could be. Despite Lisa's modest crowdfunding campaign success, there never seemed to be enough money, and stress permeated. One query from Lisa, such as whether Chance's harness could be upgraded, could spark regular talks. Frustrated sighs or irritated emotions in the midst of this chaos. Chance became a ray of peace, jumping with excitement when Lisa got home from school and wagging his tail all over. Wriggled, but still prone to coughing episodes, he was gradually gaining endurance. The puppy recognized half a dozen hand signals from sit to remain, demonstrating that Pauline's weekend training sessions were paying off. As Lisa gained confidence and saw him react to visual signals, she felt in. Their unspoken bond was reinforced by a language that was based only on observation and trust rather than sound. One windy afternoon, a pair of local reporters arrived unexpectedly with cameras in hand, testing the connection. Apparently, locals were drawn to the circulating rumors about the dangerous deaf dog. When Lisa's mother opened the door, she was shocked to see a woman with a cameraman behind her and a microphone in hand. They requested permission to record a brief segment for an upcoming newscast. Margaret hesitated at first when she read the article about the contentious animals in the neighborhood. Brought Dennis and Lisa into the foyer to talk about, absolutely not. Dennis immediately responded, crossing his arms, we've had enough drama. However, Lisa paused to think about, maybe showing, since she remembered how quickly false tales spread online. Chance in a constructive way could be beneficial. She dared, looking at her parents. If they notice how adorable he is, they might cease. After a tight beat, Dennis exhaled, all right, and Margaret shared a frightened look with him. Believing the lies, he said, but we set the terms. No dramatic headlines outside the allotted 5 minutes. As the reporters set up, a fierce wind tossed leaves over the yard. Lisa cradled Chance in her arms and offered him a calming stroke as the reporter bombarded him with inquiries regarding his behavior and health. Lisa described how he was deaf from birth. They trained him in sign language, and his illness necessitated cautious nutrition. Lisa coolly responded to the reporter's questions regarding hostility by providing specifics about the park incident and how he seemed somewhat intrigued by the camera sniffing at the other dog that had approached them off-leash. He was unable to hear the uproar or the wind-blown talk of neighbors staring through the lens when it got too close. He could feel Lisa's tension from across the street, so she made an effort to keep her body relaxed so he wouldn't notice. Nervousness in the little period when they were being seen by a camera, she quietly hoped the video would reveal to the world what she saw, a kind, defenseless puppy who only required comprehension. The reporters thanked them and departed, vowing to broadcast. The entire family let out a sigh as their automobile vanished around the corner for the next few days later in the week. Lisa wavered between optimism and fear. What if the news report reinforced the unfavorable rumors rather than refuting them? Lisa's heart raced as they all watched the program when it finally aired during the local evening broadcast. The reporter presented the story as deaf dog sparks to the audience assembled in front of the television. Lisa's stomach dropped when she saw that the community conversation was too neutral, nearly trivializing the actual difficulties they encountered. But as the video continued to play, Lisa was seen holding Chance. She felt a wave of pride as she explained his situation. The reporter concluded, with a kind observation regarding the family's persistent dedication to a special needs animal walnut. It wasn't the hatchet job Lisa was afraid she saw, but it was still a wonderful recommendation. Pauline's brief on-screen interview, in which she commended Chance's charming disposition, was followed by a short film of a neighbor, not the Worths, complaining about Chance's incessant barking, which Lisa knew couldn't be his. Sighed in exasperation, but at least the section concluded with a positive message. Perhaps the tide would turn, even somewhat. That hope was short-lived, as the following day an anonymous person published a harsh criticism on the Lisa's family is being accused on a local forum of lying to solicit pity by saying, "Any dog who can't hear poses a danger to the public's safety." Other users added their own thoughts, while others advised them to keep their mouths shut, and the online animosity grew to the point where the more reasonable. Apart from the news, the tension at home increased, and Dennis spent hours after working through financial spreadsheets and occasionally yelling at Lisa when she inquired about placing an order for additional prescription dog. Eating Margaret, who was already worn out from her work and everyday responsibilities, started to complain of headaches and insomnia. Everyone adored Chance, but the relentless onslaught of social and financial. Lisa heard a furious discussion late at night while wearing them down. Parents discussing how much more hardship they could bear in low, frantic tones, concerned that her family would be. When Lisa reached her breaking point, she took a drastic measure and posted an emotional open letter on the Nextdoor website, describing how they had no intention of creating conflict, and how they mostly used their personal sacrifice to pay for Chance's treatment. Showing that there was no intrinsic risk associated with the dog's deafness, she shared pictures of him kindly engaging with kids wearing his harness at the park and patiently receiving his medical care, before concluding with a request for any. Her post stirred things up once more, attracting a suspicious neighbor who should come see Chance before passing judgment. Avalanche of comments, some of which were positive, some of which were negative, and some neighbors. Astonishment, claiming they were unaware of the severity of Chance's health problems. Lisa clung to the few, while others intensified their concerns. Numerous voices that expressed solidarity, even those who had previously shown no concern, but suddenly recognized the family's sincere affection for their dog, and one letter in particular made her heart sing. Message from Teresa, a woman who said that after seeing the TV piece, she had previously accepted the rumors, and she became aware of how biased the rumors had been after reading Lisa's letter. Teresa wrote, "I'm sorry for being part of the mob mentality in order to meet Chance." Lisa asked Teresa over because she had a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe one person at a time the tide will turn. For a quick visit that weekend in order to demonstrate to her how composed and amiable Chance was, but her doubts persisted. Her parents were increasingly tense every day, and the animosity that pervaded their surroundings wasn't generally lessening. One evening, her mother began to remark, "It comes down to a choice between keeping Chance and the well-being of our family." Drifting away with tears in her eyes, Lisa realized the implicit danger if they were unable to find tranquility in their own neighborhood, or they can be forced to move if medical expenses become an unmanageable burden. Lisa's thoughts were constantly plagued by the dog and the prospect that if only when she observed Chance's life, which had already surmounted numerous challenges, the rest of the world could see what she saw and continued to provide genuine, unshakable devotion. Lisa sensed her will to defend him with every ragged breath he drew. He was as hard as steel, but she knew that the time would come when they would need to know how far they could push themselves and the amount of heartache they could bear before the love that bonded them to this deaf puppy turned into the chilly, cloudy, and gray weather on Saturday was the reason they had to let him go. Lisa was unable to get rid of the knot of expectation in her gut as she threatened rain but never delivered. Awaited the arrival of Teresa, the neighbor next door who had apologized. This would be the first time anyone who, once if the unfavorable rumors were true, Chance visited. Perhaps if Teresa had a positive experience, word would spread the word that the puppy wasn't a monster, and he floated around the living room looking like a Margaret. Dennis stayed in the kitchen with his arms crossed firmly while he straightened pillows and picked up scattered dog toys. Despite his support for Lisa's efforts, he was obviously tense and kept checking his phone from time to time. If this doesn't go well, he grumbled as he was leaving. But Lisa sent him a beseeching glance, and he was unaware of the tension slept in his own feeding chair, which he had come to rely on whenever he wasn't playing, or training whenever someone walked too heavily or fell on the vibrating floor. Lisa felt a rush of confidence when he opened his eyes and ears and peered in her direction, protecting love each time she saw his eyes, and at last the doorbell. As she hurried to respond, Lisa's heart pounded. Teresa was there on the porch. She was a middle-aged woman with soft brown eyes, holding a tiny bag of dog treats and smiling tentatively. "Hello, I'm Teresa," she added, tilting her shoulders apologetically. She trembled a little and said, "Thanks for inviting me." Lisa ushered her in to introduce herself. When the parents were able to nod politely, Margaret offered Teresa a seat, and Lisa got. Teresa fidgeted and threw doubtful glances at Chance as he was carefully led from the chair to the living room rug. The deaf dog Lisa was crouching next to the puppy's harness and a tiny name tag that said. Chance blinked and twitched his nose as he gently tapped the floor to indicate that someone new was there. "I brought these after catching Teresa's strange aroma," Teresa whispered. "The dog treats are soft, so I." Lisa's lips quirked into an appreciative smile, as she thought it would assist if he's okay and has any problems chewing or whatever. Can consume regular goodies if he isn't coughing, but at the moment, the soft ones are the nicest, so she took one from the bag, carefully waved it in front of Chance before reaching out to Teresa. Teresa nodded reluctantly and leaned down to offer the treat to Chance at eye level for a while. "Would you like to give it to him?" The puppy cautiously smelt the air. Then he stepped forward and carefully removed the piece from her fingers, her tail bobbing a little, but he was unable to hear the happy laugh that slipped Teresa, but he raised and tilted his head as if sensing her warmth. Lisa demonstrated to Teresa how to approach Chance's head slowly, as though she was asking for more. He drew back to allow her to speak to him without startling, and the woman complied by whispering comforting words. Chance crept closer, lightly touching his muzzle, so he could feel the little vibrations even though he couldn't hear. The woman's eyes glowed with emotion as she placed this open act of confidence against Teresa's knee. "I had no idea," she said, whispered, gently caressing Chance's delicate ears. "I truly thought the rumors were true. It's not that I try to offend. You just assume since you've read so many concerning posts." Dennis cleared his throat and said, "We know social media can twist a. We just hope people realize he's not aggressive." He told many stories that softened his earlier gruffness. Teresa agreed. She rose up, her face clouding with regret, saying, "I'm sorry you all went through that. I can't remain long after a few minutes of smoothing her shirt, but I'm happy I came. He's as kind as you mentioned with Lisa and her parents, so I'll surely let the neighbors know that I was mistaken about him." Offered her heartfelt thanks to the assurance that at least one doubter had changed her opinion following Teresa's departure from the family. Recognizing the lighter atmosphere, they all exhaled. Chance trotted to Lisa and crouched down to nuzzle her ankle, gathered him up and gave him a firm embrace. "That went really well," Margaret remarked. "Perhaps this is the beginning of something better," she said, her eyes wet. But life had other plans. Plans for the following day. When Lisa sipped her tea in the morning, her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Ramirez, the primary veterinarian who had initially determined that Chance had esophageal problems, requiring, "Please give Lisa's stomach a call as soon as possible to discuss the test results." She dialed the clinic while her fingers were shaking and twisted uncomfortably when the veterinarian. "We've observed some alterations in Chance's most recent x-rays," Dr. Ramirez remarked in a kind but serious tone. "His esophageal swelling raises the possibility of an underlying vascular ring anomaly, but his lungs are fine. Essentially a blood vessel around the esophagus. This is uncommon, but might result in ongoing or getting worse despite cautious nutrition." Lisa's voice faltered. "Well, if there's a vascular ring anomaly, what should we do? Surgery might be helpful. Nevertheless, there's a good deal of danger involved because it's a difficult process and he isn't the best applicant." Lisa's cheeks were wet as she took in the information that another possible major surgery, increased risk, and financial pressure following the call. Her parents convened. Dennis clutched the back of a chair as if it were the only thing supporting each worried face. Margaret's palm shot to her mouth. tears welling up in her eyes as she stood up. "So," Margaret said in a quivering voice, "we're discussing a major procedure. How much will it cost? And can he survive it?" Lisa was unable to speak and could only shake her head in a helpless sadness that they had only just started to observe. A sliver of societal acceptance. But now they had to confront the very real prospect that Chance's survival depended on a expensive, high-risk medical procedure. Over the next few hours, the family discussed their choices with Dr. Ramirez, who explained that an MRI would be required to verify the abnormality, and, if it exists, a specialist surgeon may need to be transported from out of state. The crowdsourcing funds, which reached a ballpark estimate of thousands, were sufficient to pay for routine medical care, but not a process of this size. Yet the alternative was bleak for the likelihood of continuous deterioration of his swallowing issues, recurrent pneumonia, or hunger if his esophagus got too. Dennis rubbed his voice tight and constricted. "I adore that dog more than anyone, but we're on the verge of. If we continue to accrue debt, Lisa's stomach will turn over." House. The enormity struck her like a kick to the stomach, and she looked at Chance, who was lying. He was so alive that he was sleeping on a blanket close to their feet, his tail wagging a little whenever someone looked at him. Even though it seemed unthinkable to believe him, the reality carried on. On them, a low-income family strained by medical expenses under social neighborhood pressure is now focusing on a potentially life-saving procedure that could be more expensive than. Lisa's hands were shaking and she was crying, as if they had never imagined spending that much money on a pet. Margaret went forward, her eyes wet, spilling again. "Let's not make a decision. Second, all right, let's check if the MRI is necessary to be sure." Lisa grabbed hold of that brief reprieve, and the vascular ring anomaly was confirmed. She said, "Step at a time," but her heart felt like it was breaking, and she would stop at nothing to give Chance the life he earned. But what if doing so meant causing harm to the family she loved? She was unable to sleep that night, so she laid in bed with Chance snuggled up by her side, his soft. Occasionally, he would nuzzle closer and she would put a hand on his flank, feeling the rhythmic snores. His breathings rise and fall. Could they discover more ways to raise money? And would the neighbors contribute if they really? As she gazed into the darkness at around midnight, she realized that the whirling questions had no simple answers. She danced on the roof of her bedroom while whispering into the night, hoping that Chance would somehow hear her. "I won't let you leave without a struggle." However, she felt a wave of fear as she recalled her mother's weeping. She sobbed quietly as she said, "If it comes to a choice between our family's well-being and keeping Chance." For the first time, she questioned whether heartbreak was imminent or if love alone would be sufficient to save him. Awaiting the ultimate terrible blow, morning arrived with a chilling drizzle that reflected the weight in Lisa's heart. She had been hollowed out by another sleepless night, yet she pushed herself through the morning tasks, putting Chance in his chair upright, weighing his prescribed wet food properly, and her pulse pounded as she watched nervously as he swallowed. He appeared steady but brittle-like. Her parents were restrained since the house had reached a stressful state, and there was a candle flame that threatened to go out at any breeze. Everyone knew that if the MRI revealed an expensive vascular ring, there would be an implicit standoff. Atypically, Lisa heard whispered talks and had to make difficult judgments. Terms like loan options and second mortgage rescue are used between her parents. Group, and each statement that was overheard felt like a knife. "Yet we cannot ruin ourselves." On Lisa's chest, feeding her anxiety that they would decide that giving up Chance was their only option, even though they had already consented to move forward with the MRI that at least provided a glimmer of optimism. Margaret spoke with Dr. Ramirez over the phone this morning. Dennis planned the operation for the following week while looking through grants and local charity that their desperate investigation highlighted the reality, if necessary, and occasionally helped with exceptional pet medical expenses. Intricate procedure that might possibly cost 5 figures that insurance didn't pay for. Although useful, it and their crowdfunding page fell far short of that level. Sensing the tension, Pauline stopped by in the afternoon and saw Lisa kneeling as soon as she entered, next to Chance, who had his head resting against Lisa's palm while snuggled up on a blanket. With a concerned expression, the trainer lowered herself and said, I heard the news about the probable vascular. She whispered gently. Ring anomaly. How are you holding up? Lisa swallowed. Tears. I'm afraid that if it's confirmed, the surgery will cost a lot of money. Pauline's face was concerned, but she reached out to stroke her parents, who are unsure if we can manage it. Chance's ears. I've witnessed similar situations in the past, Lisa, and I understand how. Impossible, but occasionally experts collaborate with you to arrange payment arrangements or rescue partners. So don't give up just because. Nevertheless, they attempted a brief training session, but Lisa's heart wasn't in it. Noticed her Diska, turning his head occasionally as though seeking solace in her stare despite Pauline's. Under patient supervision, they concluded early. Pauline gave them a quick embrace and said, "Call me if you need anything," before departing. The family was gathered in the living room that evening, and she muttered that the quiet. Dennis cleared his throat, interrupted only by the heater's hum. "If the MRI confirms, we need to talk about a plan." "The worst," he said sternly, "but we must be realistic if we could come close to a specialized rescue for medically challenged deaf dogs. They may have the resources to help Lisa's cries sound like a break through the silence. Chance woke up abruptly from his slumber, startled by the floor's shaking, and she instantly softened her voice and apologized by placing a hand on his flank. "We've come too far," she said, looking into Margaret's eyes. "Please know, Lisa, that we adore him. But what if the surgery is too much? Our resources, even if we go bankrupt, there's no assurance he'll live the surgery." Lisa's eyes would mist up with tears of grief, and she stood. She took Chance, the dog, into her arms and said, "You think giving him away to strangers wouldn't break my heart? He'll be scared by himself when he sees her in distress and licks her chin because no one will understand his hand signals or how to feed him appropriately, or that he detests it when someone approaches him from behind." Dennis calmed her by holding up a hand. "We haven't made any final decisions yet, but it would be reckless of us to ignore all of the options. Do you want him to suffer if we—" Lisa's throat constricted as she looked down at Chance's gullible eyes. The thought of not being able to provide him the therapy in time. It was difficult to watch him suffer in a strange location, but it was much worse to consider him dying in her care since she went to her room because she couldn't afford the surgery and the weight of the dispute was stealing her breath. She opened her laptop and browsed the posts on the special needs dog site while holding Chance close. Numerous pet owners described similar problems, including life-saving surgery, exorbitant expenses, and emotional distress. Some had received assistance from specialized NGOs, while others had suffered terrible heartbreak, which caused Lisa to cry. In the hours that followed, encouraging remarks flooded in as she frantically wrote a request for guidance on the keyboard. Stories of local news pieces that had sparked donations were disseminated, along with links to sophisticated fundraising sites, with accounts of knowledgeable surgeons providing hardship cases with reduced fees. Lisa clung to these rays of hope, putting them together in a list that she intended to present to her parents because she didn't think they had run out of possibilities yet. The windows were illuminated by lightning as a storm raged outside that night. Chance was saved from the terrifying blast by his thunder moving across the sky. He nestled into Lisa's side, still feeling the flash of light despite his deafness. She whispered, wide-eyed but mute, as each lightning strike showed the wet tears running down her cheeks. She heard her below and gave him silent comforts while placing her palm against his back to let him feel her warmth. The gloomy tone of the parents' quiet voices as they discussed finances. Unmistakably, Lisa felt her resolve grow more determined with every thunderclap. To protect Chance from all storms, both real and imagined. But she was only 16, and no matter how much she loved. As nightfall drew near, the hard realities of adult obligations loomed around her like cliffs. Updated the crowdfunding website with a further explanation of the new medical issue and the urgency of the MRI. Then she lay on her bed next Chance, slowly resting one hand on his. Despite her doubts, she muttered, "We'll figure this out," as her chest rose. When she eventually fell asleep, her nightmares were filled with spinning MRI images in her stomach. Morning dawned, bringing with it the glare of an operating table, the echo of sadness that always lurks at the fringes and machines. with the sound of fading thunder and the scent of damp concrete. Lisa awakened up to see Chance staring at her with. His breath had a gentle rasp, a silent reminder of how calm and unflinching his trust was. His health was still in jeopardy, so she gave him a tender cuddle at that private time of girl and dog anguish. A far-off danger until she heard footsteps in the hallway, and that they were borrowing time because the MRI was only a few days away, and it would reveal whether they would require a risky, high-stakes operation before the end of the week. Chance's MRI exam morning dawned gray and motionless, as if everything may alter or end in the blink of an eye. The entire world waited for Lisa, her parents, and the anxious puppy to get into the family's vintage automobile and drive to a specialty veterinary clinic 2 towns away, one of the few facilities capable of doing cutting-edge diagnostic imaging in. As they traveled, Lisa discreetly practiced while holding Chance in her lap. They were hopeful that he had made it this far because he had fought off pneumonia and had developed effective communication skills. She assured herself that they would eventually find a method to save him in the silent world. A technician greeted them with a serious smile as they entered the hospital's pristine white hallways, and she put a tiny ID band around. Chances requested that Lisa place him on a blanket-padded moving cart. It felt like surrender as Lisa's chest clenched and she let him go. She bent to caress his ears and signed, "Good boy," with shaking fingers. He could feel her stress, even if he couldn't hear her voice crack as she said farewell in a whisper. Placing his muzzle against Lisa's palm, the technician vanished down a hallway, leaving Lisa and her parents alone. The waiting room's walls were covered in pictures of happy dogs and cats, which may serve as brutal reminders or as a ray of hope, depending on. As events transpired, Lisa paced the length of the time ruthlessly. Margaret wore a fake serenity as Dennis tapped his finger, her eyes darting to the clock and then to her parents. Ramirez came out with his arms folded across his chest and his foot tapping nonstop. Finally, Dr. Chance is under sedation for the MRI, she added gently, her serious demeanor making Lisa's stomach knot. We'll get preliminary images. Soon I'll talk you through them as soon as we know what we're dealing with. She stopped. Lisa swallowed as she read their worried expressions and said, "He's in capable hands, I promise." The hour that followed seemed to drag on forever as she managed a wobbly nod. Noticed the flood of encouraging remarks from complete strangers on the special needs forum while browsing through her phone. Donations had increased from students who had just banded together to aid, but not enough to cover an enormous procedure. She questioned whether everyone's generosity would be in vain. When Dr. Ramirez eventually came back with a tiny, Lisa steadied herself while her parents stood rigidly shoulder to shoulder with a stack of printouts. "He does have a vascular ring anomaly," the veterinarian said, carefully arranging the scans on a tiny table. "This is what you can observe here. Your careful feeding has helped because of the constrictive band that is wrapping around his esophagus, but the underlying problem persists." She indicated an aberrant blood vessel loop in the picture, saying that surgery is the only solution to relieve the strain. Otherwise, it will probably make Margaret's tearful eyes worse, and Dennis will exhale harshly. And the price Dr. Ramirez quoted caused Lisa's vision to fade. It was greater than anyone could have ever dreamed, even in their toughest situations. "I realize it's intimidating," Dr. Ramirez said, gentle, "but in the unlikely event that it doesn't work, there's a professional surgeon who has had success with these treatments. If you're healthy enough, we'd schedule it right away because waiting each week increases the chance of further." Dennis squeezed the bridge of his nose as quiet descended on them, voice trembling with intensity beyond our capacity to manage. "We would have to." The weight of it pressing down on everyone's chest like lead, whether it was our retirement or his failure to complete, made Lisa's throat feel raw. Looked at her mother, who was already wiping tears from her eyes, and the physician. How likely is it that Ramirez Lisa, who had a skilled surgeon, will survive the procedure? There is always a chance that the veterinarian may respond, but with the right team and follow-up, we frequently see positive results. Given the history of pneumonia in particular, I would predict a 60 to 70% chance of long-term success if we manage everything carefully. She paused, and her face was filled with sympathy. "It's your. If you choose to move forward, we must promptly arrange for the family to meet in a private consultation room. Lisa could hardly sit with her arms wrapped across her head due to the tension crackling in the air. Dennis walked the cramped room in an attempt to calm her roiling stomach. Dennis said, "I don't see a way," while Margaret stared at a point on the floor where silent tears were streaming down the tiles. Margaret's shoulders trembled as she said, "We just can't second mortgage the house. We love him, Lisa, but this is more than we can handle. I'm very sorry." Lisa felt like her heart was being ripped out of her chest. "Therefore, you'd rather give up without endangering our house. He trusts us. He battled so hard for her. Let him die." Her voice broke into a sob. Dad's eyes gleamed, and I thought, I want this. It's killing me too. Margaret took a shaky breath. What if we gave him up to a rescue that could pay for the surgery? There might be groups who specialize in these situations. They may be able to find a sponsor without Lisa. She broke off after whispering that they would take him away permanently and that, given everything we had done, he might never see us again. A soft knock on the door startled them, as Pauline stood there with tears streaming down her cheeks. Filled with resolve, I became anxious and drove down, and she described entering. "He has touched many people's hearts and is more than just your dog, Lisa." She brought out a phone and displayed a crowdfunding page. Had never seen a brand new campaign launched by supporters of the training facility, and money was pouring in, including substantial amounts from companies. Lisa was unaware that the total was increasing more quickly than she had ever seen it do. Pauline quietly added, "This might not cover everything, but it's a good start for getting your tail out there." Margaret's lips quivered as Lisa's parents gazed at the phone in amazement. "Far more than you realize people want to help." Dennis wiped his brow into a hopeful smile and spoke in an emotionally charged voice. Then, even though we're still short, it's possible that his eyes briefly met Pauline's. Pauline nodded. "So we could try to work out a payment plan with the surgeon, and I could keep reaching out. Let's not give up just yet." Lisa sagged with a deaf dog rescue upstate that might be able to help. Relief, but they still had to make a decision because of reality. "Chance can't keep living like this. It's not fair to him," Ramirez told them, adding, "We have to act soon." Finally speaking, Margaret's voice was shaking but determined. "We'll do it, we'll find a way." She squeezed Dennis's arm, and he nodded after he hesitated for a minute, saying, "We'll fight for him." Tears. Lisa's eyes filled with floods of appreciation and pure, overwhelming relief as they stepped. Lisa's words brought Dr. Ramirez back into the main lobby, where he waited eagerly. She trembled as she added, "We'll proceed with the surgery." The veterinarian smiled gently and nodded as if she had. A technician carried Chance out on a card as he expected this decision, saying, "I'll contact the specialist right away." Lisa darted over to see the little gurney, still dazed from the sedative but blinking inquisitively. As she caressed his fur and signed, "Good boy," her heart thumping, she recognized that they were on the brink of despair and likelihood that the fight was far from over. Months of difficult recuperation and financial hardship would ensue, but at least they'd. Chance's tail produced a feeble thump, and he raised his head, choosing hope over surrender. Lisa placed her forehead against his, and when his snout caught her fragrance, a tear ran down her cheek, but he was unable to hear the promise she spoke. But she was certain he comprehended it by her shaking palms and steady heartbeat. "Won't give up on you. We'll confront any heartache that comes our way together in." The world outside the veterinary hospital seemed to quiet down for a moment during that shared moment. One pulse at a time, the anxiety, the debt, the gossip, and the unknown prospects. Lisa, her family, and the deaf puppy who had disobeyed were the only people left. The future was left unwritten, its pages blank, and expectation after expectation, enduring. But for the time being, one reality was certain: an unwavering love had triumphed once more, leading them to a opportunity to rescue him from the quiet gloom. 4 weeks had gone by since Lisa and her family's historic choice to proceed with Chance's risky surgery. During that period, people's life were centered around calling experts to raise money, which seemed to get more amazing by the day, and the careful balancing act of keeping Chance at ease in spite of the impending operation. Each morning brought a whirl of uncertainty. Every sunset gave a whispered prayer that the support would be overwhelming and that tomorrow would bring better news. Shocked everyone when money from strangers began to trickle in. Inspired by Chance's story, neighborhood kids sold lemonade during bake sales hosted by local businesses. Pauline carefully planned a little benefit expo for the special needs pet community to spread the news. Dog training facility with agility demonstrations and a silent auction. But Lisa was still in shock at the final bill. Every new contribution to their crowdfunding account gave her more willpower, even from neighbors who, previously examining Chance suspiciously, they now stopped by with envelopes or well wishes, showing that hearts and minds were gradually shifting, while Chance appeared oblivious to the whirlwind. All around him, life continued to be a succession of mild feedings in his upright. During brief training sessions, while resting on his favorite blanket and using Lisa's compassionate hand signals, it was simpler to coordinate meal times now that everyone was aware of the specific cause of his swallowing issues. Even though he was unaware that this was really a temporary measure before the surgery, he coughed more frequently on some days. On other days, he stumbled around the house like a playful puppy, wagging his tail and making Lisa's stomach turn with fear. When the day of the procedure finally arrived, Margaret and Dennis's eyes glistened at the sight of new squeaky toys. Took a break from work, Lisa skipped school, and the family drove to the surgery center with a hefty load. With fear and hope, Chance was once again unaware of their expressed concerns, but he shuddered at the strange surroundings. Lisa caressed his ears while whispering calming phrases that he couldn't hear but could sense through her gentle breath. Dr. Ramirez and a visiting specialist, Dr. Levinson, who was well known, met them. In order to treat uncommon vascular abnormalities in dogs, Dr. Levinson demonstrated a graphic showing the aberrant blood vessel loop that is choking Chance's esophagus. We will delicately expose the chest cavity, and she said that if everything goes according to plan, he should have no trouble eating Lisa if this extra vessel is removed or severed. The physician examined her eyes with a soft candor open chest surgery, which is usually risky, and bit her lip. Serious. Given his history, there's a chance of infection, hemorrhage, or anesthesia-related problems. Pneumonia. But Lisa and her parents are ready for any eventuality because we want to give him the future he deserves. Dennis rested his forehead while they alternately hugged Chance, their eyes brimming with tears. Margaret softly caressed his back as he pleaded silently against the pups. Lisa used her fingertips to tap the floor, which is how she usually says goodbye, or I'll be back soon. Then the family's emotions continued to race as the technician wheeled him away, leaving them in a bleak waiting area. Persisted for hours on end, a painful stretch of unknowns that Lisa felt incapable of. Breathing correctly, moving in close circles, and picturing the worst-case situations in her head. Margaret alternated between silently sobbing and making hesitant assurances. In a silent battle with his own uncertainties, Dennis sat rigidly until Dr. Levinson finally spoke. It went well, she remarked as she came out wearing scrubs with marks from the treatment. We were able to remove the constricting vessel without any problems, he said in a calm but relieved tone. Severe hemorrhage. He is already recovering, but the next 48 hours are critical. Monitoring his incision and managing the pain associated with pneumonia risk. But there are indications that the family will almost exhale collectively. Dennis covered his face and shoulders, trembling silently as she fell into her mother's arms, tears soaking Margaret's blouse. Dr. Levinson's room was filled with relief from appreciation, but also with lingering anxiety. Stated that Chance would be closely monitored at the clinic for a few days before perhaps relocating to a specialized rehabilitation center if his incision and lungs healed correctly the first. The most difficult risk was lying in unconscious tubes in the evening after surgery. Lisa was given permission to visit for a short while, but she ran into monitors creeping over his tiny body. She ran her fingertips over the shaved fur patch on his chest, swallowing hard as she saw the surgical scar, even though his nose twitched at her perfume while under anesthesia, a small indication that his spirit was still fighting. Within that delicate form, the updates became more optimistic every day. Regained awake, acknowledged Lisa's touch, and had symptoms of better swallowing reflexes that the staff had helped him with. His pain, carefully modifying his prescriptions, and making sure he didn't get fluid in his lungs. Lisa and her Parents hovered, taking turns to be close to him, humming softly or reading quietly. Songs that Lisa attempted to sing to the soft vibrations of her presence, even if Chance couldn't hear the lullabies, calmed him, and Dr. Levinson pronounced him stable at the conclusion of the second week. Sufficient to continue recuperating at home as long as they continued to be watchful for infections and feeding practices that. Everyone felt a new sense of relief when they learned that Lisa's parents had rearranged the living room into a temporary recuperation area furnished with cozy blankets, a feeding chair, and Glenn the carpenter stopped by to build a little extension to the chair, making sure there were no supplies he could need. When the time came to bring Chance home, neighbors gathered to apply pressure to his mending incision. Outside, some people are just inquisitive, while others are providing sincere assistance to Teresa. Even a colorful welcome home banner was supplied by the doubtful neighbor as Lisa took Chance to the front door. The tiny group grew silent, and the puppy blinked at all the strange faces. Lisa gave a brief hand motion, her own sign for it, while wiggling unsurely. "All right." And as the door closed and relief positioned himself inside, Chance coiled amid the family as they fell into a circle on the living room floor. Tears of happiness mingled with fatigue. Even with his head resting on Lisa's leg, he still had a lot of follow-up to do. Consultations, rehabilitation activities, and a gradual return to regular feeding. But the most difficult part was over. They had overcome the odds by bringing a deaf puppy with A. He is no longer suffering from the debilitating esophageal ailment that threatened to kill him later that. Lisa thanked everyone who contributed, even strangers, in a touching update to the crowdfunding page that was uploaded that evening. People made small donations to nearby companies that supported Chance's cause and posted images of him curled up on soft covers his newly obvious surgical scar, but healing prompted a flurry of positive responses, and many were amazed at how love, tenacity, and community support had made a second opportunity possible. An anonymous user's comment that caught our attention read, "Thank you for demonstrating to us that A." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Life worth saving doesn't have to be perfect. May we all learn from Chance's resilience. Chance might never hear the world's thunderous cheers as she read it, but his story had struck a chord of silence that united hearts that evening. Lisa sat after her parents went to bed, standing cross-legged next to Chance, who was sleeping on his side. His breathing was still A. She put her hand lightly on his chest, feeling the rise and a little rough, but she was steady. His lungs fell, released from the vicious cycle that had formerly threatened him. In that silent moment, Lisa was aware of their confidence in one another had seen them through the hardest nights, making the grief they had experienced worthwhile. She placed her forehead to his, creating a tie that could not be broken by chance or gossip, saying, "I love you," despite the fact that it was only a whisper against his side. His eyelids partially opened in the emptiness of his quiet, meeting her gaze in. With that glance, Lisa sensed the reverberation of all the vows she had ever made to him. They had experienced heartbreak together and come out on top. "Thank you for observing this emotional journey of resolve and hope, which is both fragile and triumphant on the other side." If Chance's story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can keep telling tales of fortitude, bravery, and the strength of compassion. Please leave a remark so that we can tell us how you would respond to a situation similar to Lisa's. And don't forget to watch our upcoming video for more inspirational stories of love, surviving, and the enduring ties that bind people together. And each click, share, and subscription helps us raise awareness about these creatures. Tales that are genuinely worthy of being conveyed.